way it was, Hartford's North End, 1900 to 1965, with Dennis Sullivan and his wife, Mrs. Sullivan. And before we begin, and all this will be on a calendar in the back, so you don't have to memorize it all. I just want to let you know about some of our great programs coming up. We're having a series called Smart Answers to Tough Questions. And tomorrow we'll be looking at wills, power of attorney, and advance directives. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to be finding out that there's more to retirement than money, even though sometimes it feels like it's all about money. But December also brings a classical music concert and a jazz program, programs on mindfulness and having a happy, healthy holiday, a lecture on Norman Rockwell, a virtual visit to London and Paris, a visit from Lenny Grimaldi and his book of Connecticut characters, which incidentally includes Donald Trump. And, coincidentally, a look at the dangers of fake news. That's another program. So please take a calendar in the back before you leave. And you can also sign up for our email. It comes out once a week on Sundays, and so if you want to see what's coming for the upcoming week. We have evaluation forms at the end. We always like to know how people like the program, and if there's something else they'd like to see us have a program on, then we'd love to know. Dennis Sullivan, the author of Irving Street and Other Hartford Memories, is a graduate of St. Joseph's Cathedral School and Weaver High School. And a 1965 graduate of the University of Hartford. He did graduate work at Columbia University and the University of Massachusetts. Today he'll share his memories about growing up in Hartford and offer some insight into the history of a city that is so closely tied to our own Farmington Valley here. So please welcome Dennis.
Welcome. And thank you for coming today. What a great turnout. I'm just thrilled. We're going to start out first by, I have to give some credit where credit's due. Thank you to Joan Nagy and the Simsbury Library for having us. Thank you to the University of Hartford, to the Connecticut Historical Society, the Connecticut State Library, the Greater Hartford Jewish Historical Society, and the Hartford History Center at the Hartford Public Library for their help with my research, etc. Before we even start, who's here from the North End? Oh. Okay, what streets?
Westport.
Irving, wow. Cornwall. Well, you're going to see a lot of those streets in photographs from the old days. Believe it or not, I have all of them. I wrote a book that I self-published about a year ago called Irving Street and Other Hartford Memories. And it contains my memories of growing up in the North End and also a lot of history, because I did a lot of research to find out where everything was before we were even alive. So going back to like 1900, what was in the North End, and working my way up. And along the way, I discovered there were a lot of photographs that different organizations have, but that the public doesn't see too much. And but I couldn't use them in a book because you have to have the copyrights, and it was expensive. So I only used my own photographs in the book. But that led me to having a thought about why couldn't I have a presentation of those photographs that I can't show in the book? So, by the way, the book will be available afterward. It's $15, and it contains chapters on Vine Street School, St. Joseph's Cathedral School, Sandlot Baseball, the Hartford Circus Fire, Lenox Theater, Weaver High School, Weaver High School's Golden Age of Basketball from 54 to 57 chapter, which I'm extremely proud of because I did a lot of research on it and, of course, went to some of those games, too. So this will be available. So are you ready for some time travel? Okay. Okay. This is Albany Avenue. It's pre 20th century, the late 19th century. You can see the shape of things, not much there, and the old horse-drawn trolleys. Okay. Keeney Park. Keeney Park was developed by Frederick Olmsted's architectural firm. Frederick Olmsted grew up on Ann Street in Hartford, and as a boy remembered taking long hikes out North Main Street and Windsor Street out to the area near the Windsor town line, which later became part of Keeney Park. So when he came in with his firm to develop Keeney Park, he was really excited about the whole thing because this is his boyhood haunt. And of course, he developed Central Park in New York. So it was a big arc. Now, the other thing about this park was they planted 1 million trees. This was not natural. It was all man-made. Some of the hills in Keeney Park that were 30 feet high were man-made. And it was developed to be like a rural experience. You would go to the park and ride around in your horse and buggy or your Model T, and that's why they developed it the way they did, because each of the city parks had themes. Okay. There's the gate to Keeney Park. Around the turn of the century, this is an old postcard. It's not a great picture. Go ahead. This house, everybody knows where the corner of Vine Street and Albany is, where the church is. That's what was there before it. This was the house of James Batterson, who was the president of Travelers. And apparently it burned down in the early 20th century. But that's what was there before that church. The church was built opened in 1914. Go ahead. This is the corner of Blue Hills and Albany, 1900. This was the Adams Tavern and Inn. And there were like 3 inns on Albany Avenue. One was the Wadsworth, up on the town line with West Hartford. And it's still there, but it's a private home now. Then you had the Adams Inn, which was on the corner of Blue Hills, right across the street from going toward the south. The Adams Inn, from the Adams Inn, was McGurk's blacksmith shop at the same time. Where Maxwell Drugs one day would be, it was McGurk's blacksmith shop.
Is this on the school corner or the?
No, this is on the northwest corner, which is okay here. If you remember where Maxwell's was, okay, the other one right there where the gas station went. Yeah, pretty amazing, huh? And there was a third inn at the corner of Irving Street, the Goodwin Tavern, which you'll see pictures of soon. Now, around 1900, James Goodwin and investors decided they were going to build houses in the North End. They called them cottages, by the way. The 2- and 3-family houses, mostly, with a few singles. Now, this map shows this is Garden Street on this side, and it runs up to Cabot Street. Now, Cabot Street, Edgewood Street, I meant to tell you this because my friend Mike Angelillo is here, and he grew up on Edgewood Street. It was originally called Melrose Street. And Burton Street was originally called North Huntington Street. So I guess they must have maybe thought they were going to connect the 2 streets at some point. Go ahead.
Did you say something about the lots or the prices? Okay, never mind.
No. This is Jonathan Goodwin's house on Sigourney Street. The interesting thing about this was when the Goodwins started developing that land, they also decided with their wealthy friends they were going to have a golf course. So they built a 9-hole golf course on Sigourney Street, running from Sigourney Street up through Edgewood Street. And this was their clubhouse. And another thing about this is that this Jonathan Goodwin's house, his daughter married Batterson, who lived just around the corner, on the corner of Vine and Albany. This is my own house, my childhood home, 1900, brand new. That rail, that decorative rail on the second floor was not there when I was a kid. So it must have rotted out or something at some point. The telephone pole was always there. There were 2 trees in the front yard by the time I was growing up, fairly big ones. And there was a house on the left and there was a house on the right. The one on the right wasn't built until 1915, and that was my grandmother's house, because she's the one that owned both of these houses. So our house she didn't own this house, 4547, until 1940. She bought it at auction for $11,000.
What street is this?
Irving.
40, you said 44?
45 through 47. That's that house. Yeah. We had hedges too, so none of that's there yet. And this is an advertisement for lots on Albany Avenue, Garden Street, Irving Street, Magnolia, North Huntington, and Homestead Avenue. Go ahead. What you're seeing here is the Gentleman's Driving Park, formerly known as the Connecticut Fairgrounds before this. It ran from about Milford Street up to where Homestead Avenue and Albany Avenue converge. That whole area of land. There was no houses there yet. The area was used for, in the 1850s, 1860s, and upward, for trotters, horse races. And then they went, and they also had Ivy League baseball games there. They had track and field events. And one of the reasons the Adams Inn was positioned where it was because it was practically right across the street from the entrance. So people who come to town would stay over or go there and buy a beer or something, when they were visiting the park. Keeney Park. Some sort of sailboat competition, early part of the century, at the pond. This is Buffalo Bill Cody. Who can tell me where he's standing? That's Albany and Blue Hills. He's 1911. He started coming to Hartford in 1885, playing at that the same Connecticut Fairgrounds up by Milford Street. And he had a huge show. I mean, it's like 800 people worked for him. They had 3 trains that took everybody into Hartford. Out of the 800, 400 were performers. The other 400 were the workers that set everything up and sold the tickets and everything. Then, not only that, but in order to advertise it, they used to have parades that would go from Milford Street at the fairgrounds over to Woodland, up Woodland, over to Asylum Ave, down Asylum Avenue, all the way downtown and back up Albany Avenue again. The whole group. 600 horses. Although 200 were used for work. So, this is the same corner around the same time.
What street's the corner again?
Blue Hills and Albany.
Wow.
Look at that.
Are we on Albany?
Yeah. And notice that where the Adams Inn was, over in that right-hand corner, they had built a house, which of course I never saw in my lifetime. That was always a gas station. Go ahead. This is the Goodwin Tavern at the corner of Irving. Those barns over there on the left were for horses and mules, because that's what the Goodwins raised for profit on that land. Now, if you're looking at that, now that house was torn down in 1956 for a parking lot. It was an incredible house. The man who was the caretaker with his family for the Goodwin estate and lived in that house once let me in to look at it because he parked his car. We had a 5-car garage in our backyard, and my grandmother rented all the spaces out like $5 a month or something, and he had one of them. And so I went out there one day and I said, George, could I see the inside? I was about 12 years old. Because we always used to go, my friend Herzl and I used to go up there and we'd sneak around on the property, and we saw they had bars on the windows of the cellar. And then I found out from George that was for the slaves. Yeah, and this property is, they should have a plaque on that corner because not only that, the Crown Market was there where those barns are. And going to the south on that side, going toward Garden Street, there was, at one time in the 1600s, there was a small hill with an elm tree on top, that's how it's described, where they hung the second accused witch in New England, a woman named Mary Johnson from Wethersfield. Spooky, huh?
The Eichler family lived in that house during the 50s and 60s. It was their grandfather that was the gardener.
Well, that must be George then.
Eichler, the 4 boys, and those are 2 chestnut trees that were there until they tore it down.
Yeah. Yeah, what is...
Doberman Pinscher that protected the property.
Yeah, well, there was always a legend, too, that George Washington had slept there. Yeah. Okay. There's another picture of it. It was a pretty colossal house. It was built around 1809. Okay, now you're on Albany Avenue, and you're looking west from about Brook Street. You can see the Goodwin Tavern again, up there in the distance, and nothing in between. Okay. This is an early shot of Vine Street.
Is that the park at the very end?
I don't think so. I don't know. It's hard to tell from this picture. Go ahead. Okay, this is World War I drills in Keeney Park. I blew that one up so much. Okay. This is Northwest School. What?
She asked where it was Northwest.
Oh, Northwest School was on Woodland Street, in the corner of Woodland and Albany. Yeah. But Northwest came first, and I think Northwest School had the old library too at one time. And if I remember from when I was a kid, I used to go to the branch in the school. Yeah. Who can guess where this one's got a big landmark? Who can?
That's Deerfield.
That's Deerfield, right? Look at the Albany Avenue and the trolley tracks and. Yeah. Go ahead. This picture is Wiley, Bickford, and Sweet factory. It's on the corner of Garden and Pliny, and that's my mom on the left in the front row. She was a teenager. She had to leave school in 7th grade, 13 years old, to go to work. She always described a lot of these places as sweatshops, but.
What year was that about?
I'd have to say World War I time period. There's Jones Jr. Go ahead. Yeah, and that's the Northwest School. Keeney Park workers. Shiloh Baptist Church on Albany Avenue. 1912. Northwest School graduation. In the 20s. Oh, yes, the Lenox Theater, 1925. This is the only known picture of it that nobody has a photograph of the Lenox Theater. This came from the Hartford Current files. They opened in 1925. They had a full orchestra. Well, people came from all over the state, all the theater owners and everybody. It was a big deal. There's one more too. Yeah, this is the ad that went with it. And who remembers Mrs. Stretsky? Oh, a few of you do. She was the manager when I was a kid, and very interesting lady. She had grown up in Germany and survived pogroms there, came to the United States, and her son went to Weaver with Charles Nelson Riley. Her son's name was Paul, and she got to know him because of that. He would come over to the house, and etc. And then she saw him one day at the theater, and she called him into her office, and she said, "Paul, he's never going to be in show business. You're going to be in show business." So it's like he always felt that she had sort of anointed him. So later in life, you know, when he was already successful on Broadway and everything, he thought he would do something special for her. So he invited her down to New York for dinner at Sardi's. And he knew that her favorite Broadway actress was somebody named Molly Pecan, who was then playing on Broadway in Milk and Honey. And he knew her, so he went backstage to Molly McCann, to her dressing room, and he said, "You got to come to Sardi's and help me out. Mrs. Stretsky, my old friend, she just loves you." So when they went to dinner that night, they sat down at the table and everything, and she wasn't there yet. And all of a sudden, Molly Pecan walks in, stands on a chair, and goes, "Mrs. Stretsky, I've been looking for you." Go ahead. Weaver High, just being built, 1925. Do you see? Okay. This is Garden Street, looking south from Bedford. Bedford's on the right. And it's pretty old. It's probably 1920s because you can see the car up there, the two cars. West Warren Parkway. I heard somebody was from there. Well, there it is, undeveloped.
Is that Grammy Street?
Go back.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, is that Grammy Street right
I don't know.
That's the green.
Hard to tell from this.
No, not that side of it. Come on down.
This is this is a later trolley. This is the Vine Street, Capitol Ave to Vine Street trolley, when they were finally electric. And here we have Fuller Brush. Now, watch that. Take a close look at that tower, because there's a story coming up on that. Go ahead. Fuller Brush on North Main Street. Go ahead. All right, now see what happened? They had an accident. It was under construction. They had 4 stories in that tower. And at the top, they had a 56,000-gallon water tank for their sprinkler system. And the day before, they removed about 8 rods that held it in place. And what they were going to do is they were going to build a room beneath it that was going to be like a training facility for their employees. And the whole thing collapsed, and 10 guys were killed. Plus, then they were left with, you can't see it in this picture, they had the rooftop was still hanging. And I guess the wind was blowing it around, so they had to do something because it was dangerous. And so the Hartford Transit Authority sent 2 trolleys over there, and they attached cables to the trolleys, and then they started pulling, and it still wouldn't come down. They finally had to use dynamite to get it down. Yeah. 1923. Where was this? Barber Street. Yep. Anybody here from Barber Street? Do you recognize that drugstore? Because a lot of times these pictures, they only just give you the date and where it was. Well, you can tell this is in the 20s. But, okay. This is the corner of Martin Street and Westland. Early. You see these roads don't look very good. Go ahead. Who remembers this? Yeah, not too many people do. It's the control tower where?
Where Albany and Main Street meet.
Right. Right. Yeah, I remembered this. I had tucked it away somewhere in the back of my mind, and I said, you know, I just remembered it was a guy that used to be in there in direct traffic. And one day I just came across this picture, and then I said, like, oh, wow, it really did exist. Before that, I thought it was a fantasy. Go ahead. This is the same spot in the 1920s. So I would think that tower came probably in the 30s and 40s. Because if I remember it, it had been when I was a kid. So, this is...
I'm sorry, did I go too fast?
Is this okay? This is 1933. This is my mother's family. It was my Aunt Laura's wedding day. She's in the back in the white. And my mother's on the left in that row. And that's my grandmother and grandfather. The reception was in the backyard. 5153 Irving Street. So they had 7 daughters. Originally 8. One died in the Spanish flu. Go ahead.
See the difference of generations? How the grandparents are doing the old where you don't smile in the picture, and then all the young daughters are smiling.
Right. That's true. This is the Lookout, 1936. Can you bring it down a little bit?
I don't think so.
No? Okay. Getting cut off. I think we all have been there. Go ahead. Okay, this is a later picture in the 30s of Jones Jr. What? Okay. This is the Green Bar on in Clay Hill. Green. There's another word with it too, and it's escaping me right now. Green something. Green Bay Bar in Clay Hill. Anybody here from Clay Hill? Do you remember this?
I remember my
Yeah.
grandmother lived on the corner of Center and Albany Avenue.
Yeah, it's in that area, right?
Right, and I
Yeah.
remember that there was a tavern.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was the green hat.
A Green Hat. Okay, that's it. Yeah, I mean, there were lots of bars in the North End, practically every corner. We had one on the corner of Garden Street in Albany and one on the corner of Magnolia Street in Albany. The Golden Oak and the Garden Restaurant and Grill. Go ahead. This is my family in 1941. My Aunt Margaret on the left, my Aunt Mary with the baby, my cousin Maureen. That's my grandfather again in the back. My mom, my dad, and me looking surly. Louis Nye. Zorba. He dropped out of Weaver. He wasn't a very good student. And went into local radio. That's how he got known. Because in those days, early radio, they were doing a lot of live performances. And they had different theater groups. So he was lucky and he hooked up with that. Yeah. His family had a grocery store on the corner of Albany and Baltimore called Neistat's. This picture was taken on Edward Street. I don't know what the occasion was, but everybody's all lined up. Too fast. Norman Lear.
Should I be going over to the market too late?
Doing what?
Should I be going to the movie? No.
We haven't got that far yet, have we?
I don't know.
No. Yeah. Yeah, the address I got from him was, well, he graduated from Weaver in 1940, known as King Lear in his yearbook. And he lived on Woodstock Street. But they may have moved. A lot of people moved because I heard somebody else say a different place in the North End, too.
Different places. He was bar mitzvahed in New Haven, he told me, but he came back and he finished Weaver.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Go ahead. Mike Kellen, Plainfield Street. Yeah, around the same time at Weaver, too.
39.
Yeah. 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 Now, this picture, the reason this picture, you'll see why this is in here in a minute. That's my cousin Vincent at the wheel with his dad behind him. And that's Joe Testa, who later would be quarterback at Buckley in the mid-50s. Now, my uncle Sam came to Hartford from Kansas City as a young man because his brother Phil had been here before him. They were racetrack drivers. And Phil got into an accident, ended up in the local hospital. So somebody put an article in a newspaper about this poor Italian guy a long way from home, and he knows nobody, and he's in the hospital. So my mother with her 6 sisters decided, well, let's go visit this poor Italian guy in the hospital. And so Phil ended up going out with one of my aunts, and Sam was 16 years old at the time, still back in Kansas City. So Phil sent him a picture of the girls. And my Uncle Sam said, that one's for me. 3 or 4 years later, he's in the circuit now, driving race car driver. And he comes to Hartford, meets Laura, never left, married her, and that's their son Vincent now. Go ahead. This is Pete Kramer on Earl Street, around 1941 from 1942. And this is the day of the circus fire. This is the program for the circus fire of that day. It's coming up. Wait, no, not until after the stills. Okay, you can see the ferocity of the fire here. It was terrible. One of the reasons I showed you a picture of my cousin was he died there. We were all there, and there were 8 of us. He didn't make it out. And here you can see it's just probably down into just smoking right now. Okay, go ahead. Aerial view afterward. And I think now it's the next thing. No, not yet.
No, I have to move it. Change.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Do you want to talk about it?
The University of Hartford had some rare footage of the circus the day of the fire, donated to them. And they contacted me about 3 years ago, and they asked if I would come and be interviewed to be part of the film. So I did. And the footage you see at the beginning of the performance and everything is just them walking around the grounds before it happens, and then later you see them running too. But you don't see anything inside, so you don't have to worry about that. I always have a tremendous respect for fire. I don't remember any screams, but I just remember that whooshing sound, like with sucking up the oxygen, you know, the flame. Ten minutes later, there was nothing left of it. The day of the fire was very, very hot. It was a scorcher. When the circus came to town, the circus was huge. Your imagination went wild right away. They had some sort of act where there was this firehouse and they had hoses out. This is kind of strange because of what happened after that. And these hoses were shooting out confetti. And all of a sudden, you just started to see this little flame. It was over like in that side of the tent. And it started growing very fast. And it was coming toward us now, across the tent. So my dad put me on his back. And we went down across the bleachers and got down into the crowd. And they had a chute running into the center ring so that the lions and tigers could come through like a tunnel. We had this instant bottleneck of hundreds of people trying to get up over these things and down. And that's where they had the biggest, number of casualties too. Someone that was helping people out picked both of us up, threw us over the chute. I remember coming down on the dirt and looking back, and one of those big poles, those 70-footers, was on fire, came crashing down in the area we had just left. We were looking for the rest of the family, trying to find them. I don't remember how we came around again to the front, but somehow we did. And when we got there, the scene was terrible because they had already dragged some bodies out onto the lawn. There was just smoke coming off them still and everything, and I'll never forget that. All the animals are now out in the street, the elephants and everything else, and we're looking for my mom. There's my mother laying in a lot that was, I don't know, it was like between a couple of houses, and she's sobbing hysterically. Everybody got out, but we can't find Vincent. He was a huge loss for me. They never spoke about it. I wasn't allowed to go to the wake. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. That's the way people were then. You got to protect the little ones, they shouldn't be seeing this kind of stuff. But my Aunt Laura, Vincent's mother, she started going to the windows in the front of the apartment and looking out every day, expecting Vincent to be coming home from school. It was very sad. It was never very far from the surface. It was always there. The wound was always there. Mention anything that somehow brought that up, you could feel it right away. It's just a big common memory, part of the history of the city. My mother always said that every time she saw a sunset after that, it reminded her of the fire. Well, of course, when all this was going on, there was a war going on, too. And this photograph is 1944. My uncles and my dad on the right, and my cousin Vic with me on his lap. He's getting ready to go to the Pacific. This is a guy named Ray Weiss. Went to Weaver, graduated in the late 30s. Served on the USS Colorado in the Pacific. Came home fine and lived to be in his 90s. Go ahead. And this was his cousin Marshall, also known as Marsh. His brother, okay, sorry. His brother, who at 17 dropped out of Weaver so he could go into the Army and fight in Europe. And he lived into his 90s. Still alive? Yeah?
He'll be 95 in February.
He'll be Marsh will be 95 in February. This is Garden Street. Garden and Mather. Around 1945. And what's that noise? What is that?
What's that noise? The Vimeo, is it possible the Vimeo link is playing another video? Yeah, we need to stop that because that's coming through.
Got it.
There you go.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Sorry about that.
We're having a double feature, but we didn't know it.
So this is the corner of Mather and Garden, around 1945. And in the book, I have a chapter called Christmas Italiano, which was at my grandmother's house on Irving Street every year. And I remembered this storm somehow because my cousins lived in West Hartford and they came and we immediately dashed out into the snow and it was very deep because we were little, you know. So, and I always knew it was from around that time period. So this sort of confirmed it. This was one of those Tony DeBoni pictures. Yeah, there's the corner. It used to be the blacksmith shop. And so I'm thinking this is 1940s, and that the First National then moved up the street to that bigger place, and Maxwell's then expanded because it was a lot bigger than that when I was a kid. Does everybody know where this is? Corner of Blue Hills in Albany? Yeah. Okay. This is St. Justin's Church, 1948-ish wedding party. Toady Fields, around 1948, graduate of Weaver. Go ahead. Now, this is the humble beginnings of somebody else that was famous. Can anybody guess who? 17 Enfield Street, one of his childhood homes. Charles Nelson Riley lived in this. This is a current picture of that house, but that's where he was from. Go ahead. This is back to Irving Street. That's my sister on the left, my cousin Claudia and me. Claudia went on to become the First Lady of Connecticut. She's Claudia Weicker. And we had two First Ladies on Irving Street. Mary Grady married Meskel. She lived at number 6. And so we had two of them. Go ahead. This is a picture I took when I was 10 years old of the neighborhood kids. The kid in the center, in the back there, Herzl Rotenstein, was my best friend in those years. And he came to the street from a displaced persons camp in Europe after the war, after having survived one of the concentration camps, too. He now lives in Tampa and goes by the name of Hertz instead of Herzl. We're still friends, so. Keeney Park, skating on the pond. That's okay. This house right here, we had another famous politician on the street. This was number 20 Irving Street, the second floor. This house was owned by the DeLuco family. And Dominic DeLuco, the first Italian mayor of Hartford, lived on the second floor. Because I was the Hartford Times paper boy, the Horace lived on the first floor and the DeLucos lived on the second floor. Of course, in those days there were hedges and everything too, so it looks a lot different now. It's Garden Street, looking south toward Harris Pharmacy on the left-hand corner. It's probably down about where the synagogue was. And it's around the same time Tony DeBoni took this picture too. Weaver from the Air. Mr. Reggie DeVoe sent me this card when I was in the Air Force out west. Kept it all these years. (1957) Weaver Beavers, 24-0. Go up to Boston and win the New England Championship. Yeah. Vine Street School, late 50s. The Pond House in the late 50s. This is Irving Street, about 1961. Too fast. Crown Market.
69 cents for hamburger.
This is like culture shock here. Okay. This is Monsignor Grady at St. Justin's Church in 1963, celebrating his 50th anniversary as a priest. And some of the school kids. Martin Luther King, 1964, visit to Hartford, visit in the North End. Go ahead. Lanx Theater. Ooh. This is quite a twin bill. Okay. And here's some other ones. Now, Platt's Deli was right around the corner, right on the corner of Magnolia. Nice. We always used to get our cold cuts from Platt's. Okay. Now, this spot right here is where Platt's used to be. That's what's there now. This is the snowstorm of the winter of 1961 when Kennedy was inaugurated. I don't remember how bitter cold that winter was and how much snow there was. You can see how much snow, and this is in our backyard. Go ahead. And this is the last Christmas we had on Irving Street, around 1966. And that's it. The lights.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.